Howdy, folks, and welcome to episode 58 of the New Favorite Things podcast. And we're going to check out the new and improved Google Forms and what it does differently and what it means for you as a teacher. So, first of all, if you've never been able to use a Google Form before in your classroom, I highly recommend it. It's a great way for you as a teacher to be able to collect information from your students, assess them, give them feedback. It's a wonderful resource. If you never made one before, or if you need a refresher, you can create a new Google form by going to your Google Drive and clicking on the Google Form icon. And you'll notice that your settings wheel, which was up here, is no longer there. And now you have this new tab called Settings. They've moved the Google Forms settings wheel to be right here. So it's not as difficult to hunt down. And it's kind of this linear pathway of when you're setting up your Google form, you just start at the top and work your way down. And when you're making an assignment, you kind of have to consider, what is it that you are wanting to do with this Google form? Is this going to be something that students are going to be working on for a long period of time, maybe days or weeks? Is this a form that's going to be a true like one seating assessment, maybe a quiz or a test? Do you want to have students be able to go in and edit their responses after they've submitted? Obviously, that wouldn't be super advantageous for a test or a quiz, but maybe you're doing a lab activity and the students go in and they identify their hypothesis to start out, and then they go through the lab and then they have to go back in and edit and revise it. Maybe you want your students to be able to see their score on the assignment right after they submit and then see what questions they got right or wrong. And then what type of device are your students going to be using to fill out this form? Sometimes if you are using devices that aren't always on the GISD network, you want to turn off the restrict to Granbury ISD users. So a lot of things to consider. Let's kind of go through one by one each of these settings. So the first one is this option called Make This a Quiz. When I click that, it's going to pop down a bunch of other options. So will it release grades immediately? Let's think about that. Do we want our students to see their grade right after it's done? I'll tell you, with Google Forms grading, sometimes for free response questions, you have to go in and manually give credit to those questions. So a student may get a 70% because there's 30% of it waiting to be graded. So I like to put on later after manual review. The locked mode is going to restrict this specific form to GISD Chromebooks. If you have that turned on, then students are only able to take this Google form when they are at school on a GISD Chromebook. I like to keep that turned off. As far as the quiz itself, once they've submitted it, do we want them to see the questions that they've missed? Yes or no? Do we want them to be able to see the correct answers? Or do we want them to see the point values? I think point values is pretty harmless. There's not a lot there. But if I'm giving a quiz to my first period or my first switch, I don't want my students to be able to see the questions that they missed or the correct answers and then tell the next round of students. Or maybe I do, and maybe I want it to be something where students are in a collaborative environment and one person's going to submit, see how it goes, and then the rest of them can talk about it. And then this is a great new feature where you're able to set a default value for the number of points each question has. It used to be that you'd have to go in and assign points to each question. Now you can go in and say each question's worth 5 points. Really, really easy. The next big tab, I'm going to close out of that, is this responses one. When I click on it, this is going to be a lot of control over how responses are collected inside of Google Forms. So the very first one here says collect email addresses. It means that it's going to require them to either put in their email address, or it's going to require them to be signed in. This is required to release grades manually, which means that if you have graded an assignment and then want to push the grades out, it needs to go somewhere. So there's going to be that release grades manually option for the email addresses being collected. And then it says send a response of the copy to the responder. I like to put on always. Our students in GISD have an email address, so if they're getting that email, there's no harm in it. Allow response editing. Now, this is a great question. Do you want your students to be able to submit, go back into the Google form, and change answers? Now, let's think about it from the purpose of maybe a journal, a lab journal. again, my brain goes back to science. I can put in a day's worth of work for my students to complete. And then they can go in, they can do it, they can click submit, and I get all of their responses. Well, then maybe the next day I've got more work that I want them to do. I can go back into my questions, add questions for them, and have them do it the following day. But they can go back and they can edit the previous day's responses as well. So that's a big piece of it. Consider, do you want that to be an option for your kids? Are you going to be able to take that grade immediately, put it in the gradebook, and have documentation? That kind of depends on you. Here it says restrict users to Granbury ISD. If you are going to be doing something in class, I highly recommend you turn that on. Students have a device that's GISD issued, they're able to use it there. But maybe this is going to be something that they're doing at home. Maybe they're going to be using a parent's phone, or maybe they're going to be using their personal cell phone that's not logged into their GISD account. And then they're going to have issues that say they're not able to complete it because it's restricted. So for things that are happening at home, I like to turn this off. For things that are happening in the school, I like to turn this on. And then limit to one response is a good one too. Maybe I want my students to be limited to one response so that when they click back into that form, they can now pick up where they left off. So let me show you an example. I'm going to give you question number 1. And here's my correct answer. And I'm going to duplicate this a couple times, call this question 2, and call this question 3. So when you are giving a Google form to your students, it used to be that Google Forms was kind of the oddball amongst the G Suite tools, where in a Google Doc, everything auto-saves. In a Google Slide, everything auto-saves. In a Google Form, things do not auto-save until now. Google Forms' most recent update says that it will auto-save your work for 30 days. So what does this mean? If I'm in here and I click answer 1, answer 2, it's going to say up here saving. If I were to exit out and my settings say that it's limited to one response, I can go in, get my link, pull it open, and my work is going to be saved. So then maybe I answer 3, hit submit, and it says my response has been recorded. So maybe this is like a quiz assignment and I get my grade and I did not do a very good job. I cannot, because this is set up as you can limit to one response, it will tell you you've already responded. You cannot go back in and edit. But if I, as a teacher, allow response editing on these Google Forms, now it gives me the option where I can go in and edit my response. So again, a lot of this has to be thought through ahead of time, but like you just saw, I can make those changes immediately after a student responds, and I can make it workable for that student. The next big tab is presentation. This is kind of like, hey, how do you want things to be seen? Do you want to show a progress bar while students are working on it? Do you want to shuffle question order? This one is huge if you're doing a test or a quiz in class. So now no two students will have the exact same quiz. All of the questions will be jumbled around. You can put in a confirmation message. So after you've responded, you can tell students, thank you. You can now watch this YouTube video for the rest of class that discusses our next topic, and then put in a link, save. So now my students, whenever they submit, are going to have that response given to them. So we edit our response, submit, and now my Google form tells me, thank you. You can now watch this YouTube video for the rest of class, and I can click on it. The next one down is going to be view results summary. Do you want your students to be able to see a list of all of the results that students have submitted? If you are going to do some sort of lab activity where it's going to be inquiry based and maybe students are going to see what this group got and what this group got, what this group got, this is a great way to do it. But if you're doing a test or a quiz and students have the ability to see the results summary, they will see everyone else's answers. So here's a great example. When I go in here, click submit, now it says see previous responses. And then I can go in as a student and see the answers that every single group gave to every single question. So just another thing to consider. Go back down to presentations. And then here's another one, disable autosave for all respondents. It's a great thing that students are able to save their responses in Google Forms. It requires them to be logged into their Google account, but we can turn that off if we want to. I can't really think of the way that that would be super useful, except if you have a student doing a test in class and they do not hit submit on that test, and then go to lunch, pull it up, and then show all of their friends the questions. So maybe for a test or a quiz, you should disable autosave. But then you might have that student who has a 504 IEP that gives them extra time. And that's going to prevent that student from being able to complete their full assignment within the allotted time of the period. So another thing that you might want to consider, maybe you have as you should, a modified assignment for those students. Maybe I call this my modified form. And for that one, I keep autosave on, but for my general ed one, I'm going to turn autosave off if it's a test. So this is a lot to think about. We're going to go ahead and link in the description below some of the different resources you can use in the classroom, and kind of a list of settings that if you're going to do classwork and homework, what should your settings be? If you're going to do a long-term assignment, maybe a journal, here are what your settings should be. Or if you're going to do a test or a quiz, here's what your settings should be. So be sure to look down in the comment section and in the description below so that you can see that, and we'll see you guys next time.